I did an episode a couple years ago on 3D printing and model railroading. Well, a lot has changed since that video. New products have come out and advances have occurred that if you're considering a 3D printer for your model railroad, you should know these things.
This video is brought to you with support from my patrons on Patreon. These videos would not be possible without them, and if you'd like to join the Patreon community, you can follow the link in the description below and join for as little as $1 a month.
If you're considering a 3D printer for your model railroad, the first thing that you need to figure out is what type of 3D printer you want. The two main types are fused deposition modeling, or FDM printers. This is the one that uses the plastic filament in the spools to build models layer by layer by heating it up to molten plastic and then drawing the layers. And there's also resin 3D printers that use UV light to cure a UV sensitive resin layer by layer. Now, there are different uses for each printer in model railroading. FDM printers are great for building large, simple structures as well as tools such as guides and jigs. Their weakness, though, is in prints that require a high level of detail, such as small detail parts, figures, and anything that has those really subtle details, those indentions or those little pop-outs or anything like that. This is where resin 3D printers come in. Now, there are a couple different types of resin 3D printers, but the main one you will be seeing at the consumer level uses an LCD screen combined with a UV LED array to cure models one tiny layer at a time. The benefit of this process is that you can get extremely fine detail on your prints. A lot of the printers now use 4K LCDs, so think about that level of detail. The drawback is that resin can be difficult to handle because of its nature. You do not want to get this stuff on your hands. So you will be wearing gloves like nitrile gloves when you're handling resin. Resin printers also tend to have a smaller build volume than FDM printers, but they have been catching up, and we're going to talk about that later. The biggest change that has happened since my last video in the consumer level resin printing world is the widespread adoption of monochrome LCD screens in these printers. This allows for faster prints because a monochrome LCD pixel lets more light through versus an RGB pixel, which is what the older printers came with. This means that the layer cures faster. We went from 6 to 8 seconds per layer for most resins to 1.5 to 4 seconds per layer. So that's a pretty big jump. And if you think you're doing, a couple thousand layers, that's a lot of time saved. The other big change that has happened in resin printing is the proliferation of larger resin printers. When resin printers came out, the build plates were mostly in the 5 to 6 inch range. Now we have affordable printers in the 8.9 inch range. I'll talk about one of my favorites here in a minute. And some printers that are getting up over a foot on the build plate size, and that's the diagonal of it. So what should you look at buying? Well, if you're a larger scale modeler, you may actually want to look at having one of each type. You can use these printers in concert with each other, where FDM printer creates the base of the structure and the resin printer handles all of the detail parts you're using on it. Or you can use them for various different things, like I said, using the FDM printer for jigs and tools and custom things like that. You can also use a resin printer to print details all the way up into G scale. Now, when you go to the smaller scales, things begin to lean more into only having a resin printer. Even the smaller 6-inch printers can print full-size buildings in scale, and the 8.9-inch printers can print the very large structures. So we've talked about what types of printers there are, but what you're probably saying to yourself is, where do I get the models to print? Or how can I make my models on my own? Well, lucky for you, there are already tons of resources out there. The biggest website, arguably, for finding models to print is called Thingiverse, and I'll link that below. And it has a ton of model railroad models that you can find on there. All you have to do is search to see if there is a model that you can print of what you want. Also, if you're a patron of my channel, I do design my own models, and you're at the $5 a month engineer level, you get access to my model database, and I make a new one of those each month. So that's something if you need models like that. And I do create them for Z, N, and HO scale, and sometimes even O scale. It really just depends on what the model is. If you want to design your own models, I cannot recommend Tinkercad enough. You've seen me use it on this channel. It is a website that lets you create as many models as you want using their simple controls. Now, when you have your model and you want to print it, you have to use a program called a slicer to make a file the printer can read. Now, there are plenty of tutorials online for slicers, so I'm not going to go deep into them, but if you have an FDM printer, that's the filament printer, Ultimaker Cura is a great slicer, and I've used it quite a few times. And if you have a resin printer, there are several great options. I use Chitubox, but there's a couple others as well. These all work great. Speaking of 3D printing, I do want to make a note about my Etsy store. It has not been stocked in quite a while. The bottom line is I've been incredibly busy these past few months with things that are outside of the YouTube channel and in the YouTube channel, just with life in general. And simply put, I've not been able to keep up with printing, so I took a little break, and I hope to be up and printing again soon. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, Jimmy, you told me all about these, but what printers would you buy? Well, I've got a couple of them. The one that I'm going to recommend for FDM printers, I'm going to recommend actually two from the same company. Now, I have had a Prusa Mini for a couple of years now, and it is a fantastic printer for a couple of reasons. One, it just works. It's the closest I have been to you can just turn it on, plug it in, and go, which 3D printers are still more of a machine than a printer. They're not like a desktop printer. You do have to do some work and figure out some things with them as you're going. But this one is great not only because it prints very well, but when it does occasionally break down, it's very easy to work on, and the company has all the parts you need. All you have to do is go and order them off their website, and you can swap the parts out easy. If you have multiple printers, you can actually print replacement parts for certain things on this. So I have a Prusa Mini. There's also the Prusa Mark III, and I'm going to put links to both of those in the description. Now, if you're looking at resin printers, for a smaller 6-inch resin printer, I am going to recommend the Eilgu Mars 3. I've had several Eilgu Mars. They are just solid printers. They're very well built. They run very well. They're great for if you're just getting started on resin printing, and plus a ton of people have them, so there's a pretty big knowledge base out there. Now, if you are looking for one of the large printers, of course, Eilgu makes the Eilgu Saturn. They also make the Eilgu Jupiter, which is really huge. I think it might still be in pre-orders. But the one that I use is the Voxelab Proxima 8.9. Now, all the printers I just mentioned are monochrome printers. The Voxelab Proxima 8.9 is a sub $400 8.9 inch screen. So if you're an HO scaler and you want to do something more than details, you're going to want to look at that 8.9 inch screen. And at least as of right now, that Voxelab Proxima 8.9 is the least expensive. And one thing about a lot of these companies is they all use the same components or similar components. So it's just a matter of, does the printer work and how well does it work and what is its build quality? And the Voxelab Proxima has a solid build quality, and I have been printing with it for a while, and it works really, really well. And it's a nice larger printer, and it's relatively affordable. So those are the printers I can recommend. Anything from Prusa, I highly recommend. And for smaller and for just printers in general, you can check out Eilgu. They have a lot of great ones. Anycubic's another great company. I also can highly recommend the Voxelab Proxima 8.9. So 3D printing is a huge part of the future of model railroading. And I know it has been a huge part of my modeling experience. If you want to learn more, I've linked several videos right here. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.